Welcome to the video review, Dinobot Double Take, featuring the original Dinobot and the one that butchered his character. I got both of these guys secondhand, so they're kind of in varying condition. Like many of the Beast Wars figures, these guys' robot modes both feature tails as weapons, but I'm missing one. And I really don't mind not having it for his robot mode, except for the fact that that leaves this guy with a gaping butthole. Starting with the original Dinobot, this is the first release of him, not one of the repaints. And as many of the Beast Wars figures, it doesn't have a very convincing beast mode. And I'm not even talking so much about the big orange shins that make up his belly. I'm really talking about these tiny legs and these very unconvincing feet, which this one manages to pull off way better in a much more Jurassic Park fashion. Also, his missing tail was just a little too phallic for my preference. I don't really know what this peg is for. It's not really used in either mode, and nothing attaches to it. It's a little upsetting that they didn't bother painting this panel on the back of his head like the rest of his stripes. It really throws off this area. The placement of his eyes makes me think he's enjoying what his feet are doing to his neck too much. Although the neck feet aren't too bad, considering they drastically reduce his visible head syndrome. I will note that I reversed the legs on this figure so that in robot mode the stripes are on the outside of the robot arms. As far as animal accuracy goes for this one, it doesn't look like an actual raptor, but it definitely is very reminiscent of one. More so than this one. Over time, some of this guy's hinges have gotten a little worn, which prevents this flap and tail from being held into position very well. I've tightened a lot of his joints with super glue, which is not an issue for this figure. Opening beast jaws! For some reason, Dinobot 2 has the second mouth from Aliens, which if you move his head just right, he looks like a bird regurgitating food for its babies. As far as the beast modes go, it's where this figure fails and this figure succeeds. Despite the fact that he ruined Dinobot's character in the show, I love the way this guy looks. He looks all bony and powerful. It's how I'd imagine Skull Greymon if he had chrome finish. The Transmetal 2 line is really where they gave up all attempts for the beast modes to have any purpose, and you might as well just start calling the show Wars. They've done a pretty good job of fabricating meanings for beast modes up until this point. The original beasts obviously weren't any good for disguise, unless a human-sized wasp isn't a dead giveaway that something is amiss. They got past that by having the beast mode cover up all the robot mode parts to protect them from Energon. The Transmetals couldn't use that excuse since most of the beast mode parts and robot mode parts were the same. But cleverly, the beast mode brought you that much closer to being in your vehicle mode. So it worked. Except Optimus Primal, whose legs in beast mode and robot mode were both used to make up the hoverboard. So fail. Then you get the Transmetal 2 line, lacking any facade of disguise, protection, or transportation. Minus Cheetor, who could still only fly in his beast mode. Other than looking really badass, maybe, Transmetal 2s have no purpose for a beast mode at all. I like to pretend that Transmetal 2 forms need a lot of Energon to run, so they have to eat raw Energon, and they need their beast modes to do it. But then again, Optimus Minor screws this up by having one mouth for both modes. Well, you just ruin everything, don't you? And now onto robot modes. For the first Dinobot, pull down his robot mode legs, rotate these panels, rotate the legs at the knee, fold out the feet, fold the beast mode arms up to the back, and then fold the part that holds the tail up against the back. Rotate the arms down, pull down the beast mode head, and close that panel. And there you have original Dinobot in robot mode. For the deuce, go ahead and pull down this panel if it hasn't already done it itself. Then pull down the arms, and rotate back the robot crotch. Then rotate the robot shoulders up, and fold out the shoulder pads, fold down the arms. There's these little panels here that if you fold out slightly, help prevent the shoulder pads from sliding back down. Rotate the robot arms into position, pull this panel off the back, fold down the raptor head, then push it up, and then fold this panel back up, peg it in, and fold the other panel all the way up, and there you have Dinobot 2 in robot mode. Now here's where, in my opinion, this figure succeeds and this figure fails. For this guy, while there's not a lot of accuracy to the show, he has a few key things that really make it work for me. One of them being his hands. These are dead on for the show. Granted, his robot mode hands were really weird in the show, they eventually grew on me. I'm really glad that this figure features them. It kind of bugs me that his wrists aren't articulated at all, but I still like it better than this one's wrists. Although this doesn't look a lot like his TV counterpart, I can see why they made him look a lot different for the show. But at least the show version carries over some defining features of this toy, one of them being ugly as sin. I removed his mutant battle mask, which reveals these circle-shaped ports here, which are somewhat reminiscent of the vents on the side of his helmet. Even though the Dinobot from the show didn't have any color on him anywhere near this, I really love this color right here. Most of the time it's orange, but in direct light it kind of turns pink, and it gives it a really cool marbly effect. He also has it under the Raptor mode head here, and it features ribs and a spine, part of which made it onto his design in the show. Granted, his head isn't that accurate to the show, considering the helmet's the wrong color and he doesn't have a mouth. I still like this figure better. I know this figure isn't that good, but darn it, I love it. He is the original Velociraptor, and you can't say otherwise. I'm actually kind of certain that's where Velociraptor came from. One thing this figure has that I would have loved to have seen on more Beast Wars figures, or Transformers figures, or all figures in general, is these arm joints. These are fantastic. They're not actually ball joints, so they don't wear down, but they have the same amount of movement as a ball joint, and it maintains a position better than any ball joint I've ever seen before. Even after all these years, they're still super tight and can maintain the entire body weight of the figure. Upside down push-ups. It doesn't bother me so much not having his tail weapon, but I still really want that little sword of his. You gotta watch it with this figure, because if you're not careful, you could really turn it into something terrifying. I found out one day when I was messing around with this figure between modes, and ended up with Raptor. I know it's kind of crazy, but this thing is actually straight up terrifying. I mean, look at it. I wouldn't want my children playing with something like this. It almost gives me nightmares. And its super robot nipples are not helping its case. This one's posability may be limited, but it still runs for some awesome poses from the show. It's really cool that you can use Depth Charge's yellow projectiles as golden discs. Both of these modes feature something I can really appreciate, and that's the Beast Mode heads as chests. These are both intended to have tail weapons. Dinobot 1 holds his via little ports in his hands here, and Dinobot 2 can hold his on a little peg on his finger, but it doesn't really work. So much so that they didn't even bother to put it in the show. It's pretty bad when they were willing to use Silverbolt's feather missiles, but not this tail weapon. The length of this Dinobot's hands are actually longer than his legs. The big finger is hindered by this tube here, and if you're ambitious enough, you can push this tube past the little peg on the side of his arm, and it gives you a little bit better movement with this finger, but it's still pretty restricted. I don't mind so much that this one's legs are too short and his arms are too long, and the wrists don't really work all that well, especially with the fingers. And not even so much that this panel doesn't really lock into position. What really bothers me is the Dinobot head. The cool thing is, it's a dead ringer for Dinobot's robot mode head. Way more than this one is. This one doesn't even have a real nose. No, my biggest issue is that the head doesn't match this body. This body feels like that of a young guy, a new guy, a super new awesome character, some biomechanical badass. Not an old ugly warrior who moonlights as the Velociraptor. Not to mention that this one's existence utterly annihilates the awesomeness that was the original Dinobot. The spark crystal on his beast mode head is now on his robot mode chest. It's the Predacon symbol. I'm a little upset they didn't do the thing they did with Transmetal 2 Black Arachnia, where the spark crystal can switch from Maximal to Predacon. I felt that would have been a nice touch on this figure, especially considering how many times both Dinobots went back and forth between good and evil. I would have liked if they found a way to lower these shoulder pads just a little bit more. It must really suck for a character whose only long-range attack is eye lasers to have these giant shoulder pads prevent him from being able to see anywhere but directly in front of him. While the original Dinobot was simply a badass Predacon who switched sides, Dinobot 2 is a product of Megatron's nearly perverted obsession with the original Dinobot. Seriously, how many times did Megatron clone him? I'm sorry, this guy just feels like a vain attempt to relive all that was cool of the original Dinobot. Just a few size comparisons. Here's Depth Charge, Optimus Primal, Optimus Minor, and Megatron. In the end, I gotta give this figure a 7 for its robot mode, but a 4 for its beast mode, giving it a total of 5.5 to 6. I still really like this figure, and if I were ranking it on how much I liked it, I'd probably give it a solid 7. As far as this guy goes, he's probably gonna rank higher simply because he is a superior figure. His beast mode, I'm gonna go ahead and be generous and give him a 9, but his robot mode, I'm gonna give him a 6 to kind of even things out, giving this guy a 7.5 or 8. Even if I really hate this one's character from the show for what it did to the original, I still love both of these figures, and I wouldn't give them up. This has been the Dinobot Double Take Review, and thank you for watching.